माइक आना है हमारा। माइक आना है हमारा। माइक आना है।
request everyone to please put your phones on silent. Good morning to one and all present here. Respected DG Sir, Dr. G. Narendra Kumar, our Chief Guest for the day, Shri T.R. Raghunandan Sir, DDG, Shri Sashibhushan Sir, dear colleagues, and my dear students. On behalf of Center for Panchayati Raj, I extend a warm welcome to each one of you. As you know, we have gathered here to commemorate 75 years of India's independence and hashtag Azadi Ka Amrit Mahostav. Azadi Ka Amrit Mahostav is an initiative of the Government of India to celebrate and commemorate 75 years of independence and the glorious history of its people, culture and achievements. This Mahotsav is dedicated to the people of India who have not only been instrumental in bringing India thus far in its evolutionary journey, but also hold within them the power and potential to enable our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji's vision of activating India 2.0, fueled by the spirit of Atmanirbhar Bharat and making India self-reliant. The official journey of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav commenced on 12th March 2021, which started a 75-week countdown to our 75th anniversary of independence and will end post a year on 15th August 2023. In sync with this ideal and objective, the National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj has launched a series of programs to celebrate Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. The first program, held on 12th March 2021, was a webinar and panel discussion on barriers to women empowerment, breaking the glass ceiling in the post-COVID period. And since then, several programs have been organized, like webinars, colloquium, training programs, competitions, publishing working papers, etc., on various social and economic issues. Today's program is one such event being organized by Center for Panchayati Raj, Decentralized Planning and Social Service Delivery, NIRDPR, and is a lecture discussion on Panchayati Raj and rural development in India, achievements, challenges and prospects. Before we proceed further, may I request our dignitaries, DG Sir, our Chief Guest of the day, Shri T.R. Raghunandan Sir, DDG Sir, to kindly come on the stage and take their seats. May we put our hands together to welcome them on stage, please. May I request our dignitaries, DG Sir, our Chief Guest of the day, Shri T.R. Raghunandan Sir, DDG Sir, to kindly come on the stage and take their seats. May we put our hands together to welcome them on stage, please. I now request our DG Sir to present a bouquet of flowers to our respected Chief Guest of the day, Shri T.R. Raghunandan ji. It is indeed a proud privilege to introduce our Chief Guest for the day, Shri T.R. Raghunandan Sir. Shri T.R. Raghunandan is a consultant on decentralization, anti-corruption and heritage conservation. Formerly in the Indian Administrative Service, he has served in various capacities such as Deputy Commissioner of Bangalore Rural District, Chief Secretary of the Zilla Parishad Hassan, Secretary Rural Development and Panchayati Raj Department, Government of Karnataka, and Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Panchayati Raj, Government of India. He quit the IAS in 2010 after 27 years in order to work on his pet passions of strengthening local democracy, local governments, and anti-corruption. He headed and ran the iPaidBribe.com initiative, which crowdsources reports on corruption from citizens. Sir is currently handling a number of national and international assignments, including advisor to the Accountability Initiative of the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi, and advisor to Login Asia, a network of practitioners in decentralization from 11 countries in South, Central, and Southeast Asia. Sir has also worked in several Indian states directly with the panchayats and their advocacy associations, as also with the state governments and several expert committees constituted by the Government of India on decentralized public governance. He has also headed consultancy teams for the 14th and 15th Central Finance Commission of India and submitted reports on local government finances to these commissions. On the heritage conservation side, he is a model maker, industrial heritage archivist, steam railway documentation enthusiast, and classic automobile restorer. We welcome you, sir, and it's a proud privilege to have you in our midst today. May I now invite DG sir to kindly present his opening remarks.
Esteemed faculty members, students who are present here, others who are present here, DDG of NIRDPR, Dr. Sucharita, I take this opportunity to welcome Shri T.R. Raghunandan, who is a well-known name in Panchayati Raj, who has taken voluntary retirement from the IAS to pursue his passion working for panchayats. And as Sucharita was mentioning, is a befitting occasion, the 76th year of independence, which has just gone by, to take stock of what happened in rural development and Panchayati Raj in this country over the past 75 years, how much of progress we've been able to make with the huge amount of investments that the governments in India make, adding up to almost about 4 lakh crore rupees today. And looking to the future, what we can hope to achieve in this sector, what areas we should be focusing on, what approaches we should be taking. All these aspects are of great significance. And one thing which bugs me all along is that in spite of the huge amount of investment that we make, we don't have a consistent rural development and Panchayati Raj policy in this country. So, being the apex capacity building organization in rural development Panchayati Raj and being a think tank for the Ministry of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, we should take this effort to help the ministry develop a policy for rural development and Panchayati Raj. So we are requesting every one of our centers, 21 centers which are there in NIRD, to similarly take stock of what's happened in their own areas of work, be it agriculture, be it rural infrastructure, be it self-help groups, to take stock of what has really happened in their areas over the past 75 years and what we can do further over the next, let's say, 75 years or so. So once we have this, we would have the contours and elements of a policy for rural development in Panchayati Raj, which we can sew together and hope to bring together a policy for rural development in Panchayati Raj. So Mr. Raghunandan's address today will be the first step in that direction, and would like to request him to show us the path in that direction, and also request all our faculty members and others present here to work towards the direction of developing a policy for rural development and Panchayati Raj based on small elements of work that each center will put together. So I take this opportunity to once again welcome Shri Raghunandan to this momentous meeting and look forward to his guidance and moving the direction of developing a rural development policy for this country. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your illuminating insights on the matter. May I now request our chief guest, Shri T.R. Raghunandan, sir, to deliver his address on Panchayati Raj and rural development in India, achievements, challenges, and prospects. Please, sir.
Respected Director General, Director General, faculty and students of the NIRD, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be here. The last time I was here was on November 7th, 2019, and after that there's been a sea change in our lives because of the pandemic, and it has also had a bearing on the way local governments have functioned in India. It's an interesting thing that we shall discuss later. My first question is that point. It's a half question and it's a point. Is that I hope I can be very frank. I believe I am within a family, and I think understanding a problem is half the solution to solving it. So I'm not going to engage in praise. Some of it is unnecessary, because I think that we have a serious problem when it comes to strengthening local governments in India. So let me be the counterpoint, the bad boy, the person who tells you unpleasant things. So I'm going to forewarn you that my presentation is, some of it will be contentious and unpleasant. But let me also say that every single thing that I say here is backed by data. The data cannot be presented today. It will take weeks to present the data. But every single thing that I say here is extracted from presentations that I have made to the highest levels and to fairly critical audiences. And I will be able to defend these. My next question is, before I start, because some of you might not like it, but there's going to be a little bit of theory that I'm going to put into my presentation. The reason why I ask is, I want to know how many of you have read the works of the theoreticians on fiscal federalism, people like Musgrave, Samuelson, Oates, Thibault, a second generation fiscal federalism, one person, two, right, three, yeah. Now, this is stuff that I teach, and I teach it in universities, and I take something like 4 to 5 presentations to just look at the theory of fiscal federalism before you come to the practice of it in India, because I do believe that if you understand theory, you can understand why certain things happen in a particular way. You're able to understand the why some of the symptoms don't go consistent with the laws of the land. So let me take some time, because the majority of you haven't gone through these theories. I'll quickly run through them before we actually come down to what the situation is that is prevailing in India. So some basic musings, I will cover the theory. Then I look at the journey thus far, and then look at what we can do for the future. So if you look at Samuelson and Musgrave, when they started working in the 1950s on what is the role of government, one of the important things that they came up with was that government has some basic functions, which is to macroeconomic stabilization, redistribution, and then the delivery of services. So there are 3 levels of functions. The stabilization duty is very important, because without stabilization, there will be no consistent society with the right incentives for economic progress. Redistribution is important, because an unequal society is a recipe for disaster. And then there's no point trying to deliver services, because everything will dissolve into an anarchy, as an unequal society tends to take to violent means to equalize if the government does not equalize. And the third is the question of what services to deliver, how much of services to deliver, who should be subsidized, to what extent, and so on. So, which is exactly why we elect governments, and we translate our preferences through the government to ourselves by way of governance. They also came up with the point that while you can say that voluntary taxation or voluntary payment for public services is possible, in reality it never really happens. People have to be taxed, and taxation does carry some form of compulsion along with it. But the important thing about both Samuelson and Musgrave was that they never talked about decentralization. They just said service delivery is the task of government, but they were very dismissive about local governments. They said, oh, local government is at best a delegated agency to deliver services. We are just describing the broad picture of who should deliver services. So the importance of local governments in the delivery of services began with the work of Ronald Coase, who ended up with the Nobel Prize, and the work of Tibu. Ronald Coase actually saw how local governments in the United States began to work and deliver certain self-enforcing regulations in order to ensure that public goods were delivered and people paid taxes. And therefore he said that local governments could probably be a very good way of implementing the public service delivery aspect which Musgrave underlined. But Tibu was the one who said that if local governments are self-contained in the delivery of services, then people will vote with their feet. They will carry their tax bases to those local governments where they can get the best basket of services for themselves through the payment of taxes. So people will vote with their feet. Of course, Tibu's theory was then overturned by Oates, who said that it is not possible for people to migrate and vote with their feet to seek places where service delivery would be appropriate for themselves. Though it does happen. I mean, I know my niece, who used to work in New York, did not stay in New York, but she stayed in New Jersey because the school districts were good. She voted with her feet to stay in New Jersey because for the taxes that she paid, she was getting good school education for her children. And I know that possibly when she retires, she will move to Florida, where the taxes that she pays will get her better health care for older people. So people do move. But the whole point is that many of the services that are delivered have wide area externalities. You see these battles in India, for example. You see the smoke coming from Punjab affecting the health of people in Delhi. Why? Smoke coming from it, even across the border, can affect people. So as the world is integrating, as we are facing climate change, there are going to be wide area externalities. So what Oates said that was that the Tibu solution of voting with your feet will not get you an ideal final outcome because externalities have to be managed. But at the same time, he said that if the cost of service delivery is uniform, then a local government is better than a centralized government in delivering that service, because a local government can translate the preferences of the people much better. Which means that if the cost of delivery of the same service, let's say housing or water supply or whatever, is uniform, that's a very important conditionality, because it's quite possible that a central government can centralize and create scales of economy. But if the cost is uniform, he said it's much better that a local government delivers those services. But the very interesting thing here was there was a counterpoint to this coming from two very important researchers. One was Breton. He said competitive governments. He said, I don't care as a citizen which level of government delivers what. As long as services are delivered to me, as long as I have a choice, I will actually like competing governments. So I would like to have a Navodaya Vidyalaya, I would like to have a Moraji school, I'd like to have a municipality school, and I will check which one is competing with the other, which is performing better, and I will admit my child here or there depending upon who's performing that service better. So that was his theory. You can see a little bit of it happening in India, where there's a large overlap in certain subjects. We have a lot of concurrency in the service delivery. And in some states, you do see the position where a chief minister openly says, I am competing with the private sector. But for example, if you go to Delhi, the chief minister says, my schools are better than those of the private sector. And he puts out an outcome analysis saying that people have shifted from a private school to a government-sponsored school. But the last one is very important, very, very important. Walden, who made this rather far-fetched claim in the 50s and 60s, he said that, listen, if Oates says that all externalities have to be managed, and if that management is the crux of who delivers what, he says theoretically that if you have a union government or a national government which can manage all spillover externalities, then you don't need decentralization. And he went so far as to say that decentralization is unnecessary, it's a waste. Very important. Very important, because is it coming true? Is it coming true? And I'm not speaking about India. Is it coming true across the world? I wonder how many of you have read this book, says just give money to the people. It's an analysis, it's a research analysis of cash transfers. It's an old book, it's a decade-old book, but it's an analysis of 40 cash transfers, both conditional and unconditional cash transfer programs across the world. And it includes NREGA and classifies NREGA based on the experience of 10 years back as one of the most successful conditional cash transfer programs in the world in terms of effectiveness of delivery, in spite of all that we criticize NREGA for. Overall, this has been the position that it has had an impact on the reduction of poverty. And if you look at Latin America, which is predominantly urban, you find that in places like Chile, Argentina, and to some extent in Brazil, you will find that cash transfers, Bossa Escola, other cash transfers, both unconditional and conditional cash transfers have proved to be very, very effective. And they didn't require local governments. They just required a database of citizens and a way to transfer the money to citizens' accounts. So if you are able to do that, there are radical right free thinkers who say that let's dispense with government doing for basic functions. Let's just put money in the hands of people and then let governments compete. A combination of both Breton and Walden. It flies in the face of everything that we are saying as champions of decentralization. I presume all of us are champions of decentralization in the classical sense. This competes and contradicts everything that we say. This is an argument, a very potent argument in the face of all that we are going to say. Now the question that we have to ask, and the question that I would like to ask, and that will be the thread of what I am saying here, is whatever the constitutional reality, the legal reality, and the impressive numbers of political people that we have elected on the ground, that is something that I think we need to be proud of. 3.2 million elected representatives, 50% of them, nearly 50% of them women, all marginalized society, people from marginalized groups represented. Impressive political achievement has converted India from being the sparsest democracy, where a huge number of people just elected near 4,000 MLAs and MPs, to one of the most intensely practiced representative democracies in the world. Beautiful, fabulous, impressive achievement, but is it going to fail in the face of this? Is this what is happening in terms of practicing reality? What Walden is saying is something that I would like to check. Now the very interesting other aspect, a sobering aspect, and this is based on empirical evidence, arose somewhere around 2008-2009 when second generation fiscal federalism proponents came up, looked empirically at what has happened to countries that went in for big bang decentralization. And what did they discover? They discovered fiscal fragmentation. Massive fiscal fragmentation, because what happened was that local government politicians began to promise much more than their financial envelopes would allow, and it led to radical fiscal breakdown, ending up with the national governments holding the debt kitty, having to bail out local governments because local governments were irresponsible in terms of expenditure. This has happened across the world. You go to France, in fact I was talking to a French colleague, and he was telling me that when they decentralized in France, local mayors began to build huge football stadiums because that is what would get them elected next time. So they gold-plated local investments and they promised it on the basis of future revenues earned, so that the next government was faced with increasing property taxes to pay for the debts incurred by the previous local government. And in many countries this led to accelerated fiscal breakdown. So this was a kind of a warning signal to people who are in favor of big bang decentralization, saying that once you decentralize, then everything will happen wonderfully, services will be delivered locally. But that's not really the truth. In fact, if you decentralize more, it is not necessary that local taxes will be collected. In fact, there will be local tax substitution. And this is something that you see in India. Even in states like Kerala, which has done wonderfully well in terms of big bang devolution, untied funds, local taxes, in my opinion, though still substantial in per capita terms, is vastly underperforming. Considering the way that rural urbanization has happened in Kerala, the tax base in Kerala is much more. They should be raising 10 times the local taxes that they are supposed to. But if you're a Panchayat president in Kerala, the incentive for you is to actually be an agency to the government above, spend that money rather than become unpopular and risk collecting taxes locally. Because the next time you're not going to win the election. And quite often, because of a rotation of reservation system, you don't even get a chance to stand for election the next time. So the incentive for you to spend be a nice guy or a nice lady and say tata to the panchayat. So the whole point is that unless local governments are faced with a budget constraint, planning will become an exercise in demanding everything without putting a budget envelope on it. I remember that I did an assessment of a state, Madhya Pradesh, in 2012, where I looked at the participatory planning exercise that happened in Madhya Pradesh. And when all the panchayats, there was a fabulous ground up participatory process. And when all the expenditure needs of all the panchayats were added up, the allocation that was required was 1,92,000 crore to implement what the people demanded. But the budget available was 20,000 crore per year. So ultimately somebody else was arbitrating and deciding which of the programs would be cut. And the cut was about 90% of what the panchayats demanded. Because one of the most important things about planning is not merely creating a wish list, but to also prioritize the wish list and cut it to your budget envelope. Or otherwise look at your budget requirement and see how that budget can be raised. That's how we do our house budgeting. When you do a budget at home, you are faced with a hard budget constraint which comprises of your income and your spouse's income and your savings. And then you put it together and then you plan within that, and then you say, no, I will not do this, I will do this I will prioritize for next year. And that's exactly the same principle that any government should adopt, which it doesn't. So what happens is that these people, the second generation fiscal federalism group, has prescribed certain, shall I say, important design features when you design an intergovernmental system. One is that there must be a hard budget constraint, and only a hard budget constraint is the most sustainable motive for efficiency and accountability in government. So when we say we are going to spend 4 lakh crores, I am worried whether that 4 lakh crores is merely converting the panchayats to an implementing agency with a large number of elected people just sitting there and not really doing anything. But is that the devolution that we envisaged in our government system, in our constitution? To my mind, it isn't. But a lot of people might believe that it is. So it's an arguable point. I believe that devolution means that you must have a hard budget constraint. You take the good with the bad. You take the tough along with it, along with the good aspects. You are empowered, but you are also empowered to collect taxes, and you are empowered also to be responsible. I know it's a bit of a contradiction, but you are empowered to be responsible. Otherwise, you can just be an agency and implementation is actually being driven from the top. Now, just look at all that I have said so far, which is part of the theory, and put it against the incentive structure that faces the various actors in our system. The politician is not a visionary. Please understand, no politician is a visionary. Every politician cutting across countries in any democracy has just one motivation: to get elected the next time. That's it. No politician won a election on the promise that they will raise more tax. They go to campaign with expenditure promises, with entitlement promises, right? So the incentive for a politician, and I'm not talking making a difference here between a panchayat level politician or a national level politician or a state level politician. The incentive when you enter politics, how many of you have been in politics? I dabble in politics. I'm not in a political party because my wife has told me very clearly that if I join a political party, she will leave and all the bank accounts are in joint names. And my wife is a former principal accountant general, so she knows exactly what she's talking about. So how many of you have been in politics? Or have you helped a politician? Have you interned with a politician? I have done that. I'm a lawyer, so I avoided my wife's conditionality by actually working with a politician. I do capacity development programs for different political parties on this issue, on local government. And luckily in Karnataka, in spite of all the combativeness that you see on the surface, there is a fair amount of consensus on this issue cutting across political parties. That's a very interesting thing that you notice about politicians. They're not bad sorts of people. They are reacting to what you tell them to do. Right? So the point about politicians is the same, whether it's at a panchayat level, at a state level, and at local level, at a national level. And the political space is increasingly crowded. It's very crowded in India. And to my mind, when I reflect, I think we made a crucial decision mistake by having a three-tier panchayat system. We created too many levels. So we have three tiers competing with each other. Then you have the MLAs competing with the whole lot. And then you have the MPs competing with the whole lot, again from the top. And all of them claim to know the mind of the people best, because all of them are elected directly. If you look at Mahatma Gandhi's, there was a nice book written by Sriman Narayan called Gandhi's Vision of the Constitution, which was published in, I think, 1948 or so. I read it in the Parliament library. It's out of print, but I believe it's available on Google now. So Sriman Narayan translated what he thought was Gandhi's vision. Gandhi wrote the foreword for it, and what Gandhi wrote, he was in Noakhali at that time, his mind was occupied with quelling communal rights, and he said, I haven't read this book, but if Sriman Narayan has written it, I endorse everything written in it. And what it says was that the local government people, the local government representatives, the panchayat members, would be the only people who are directly elected. They would elect the MLAs, and the MLAs would elect the members of parliament. And do you know who actually implemented it? Ambedkar, of course, threw it out, and we had direct elections at every level. So that allows every elected representative in India to claim a direct bond with the people. But you know which place actually implemented it? It was done by a dictator in Pakistan. Ayub Khan actually implemented a system wherein because dictators, by the way, decentralize pretty well. It's very interesting, but in our region, you find that people like Ayub Khan, Irshad in Bangladesh, and Musharraf in Pakistan actually did Big Bang devolution because they used it as a way to keep the political noise far away from them. They were inimical to parliaments and provincial assemblies, but they strengthened local governments because they felt that local governments would provide them a legitimate claim to being democratic. All of them did it. And what Ayub Khan did was he amended the constitution to say that members of parliament would be elected by the Union Parishad, the Gram Panchayats of Pakistan. Right? Interesting. But the fact of the matter is that politicians compete and they all want to win power. Bureaucrats in the judiciary like to exercise power, create patronage networks. Career progression is very important. Play safe, don't rock the boat. Lose power. The disincentive is that if you step out of this, you're a maverick, you lose power and you lose your career as well. Of course, sometimes it's voluntary. I think everybody, I met Mr. Manishankar Iyer the other day before yesterday, and I told him, sir, you quit the government and every person working with you is also quit the government. So by the time I worked for 10 years in local government and democratic decentralization, I was unemployable as an IAS officer. I was too anarchic and I just didn't fit into the system, so I said bye to it because I had a wonderful time in the IAS, never regretted it, won't criticize it. But I stepped away because the incentive structure had changed. I was a maverick on the other side. And so I chose to leave this. It's another thing that I built a separate career, that's fine. Contractors and NGOs are very important. When you're saying you spend 4 lakh crores or 3 lakh crores or whatever, then a lot of contractors or NGOs are in the game. Because ultimately implementation is tendered. Capacity building contracts go to NGOs. Contractors love centralization because it means, from a bona fide sense, contractors love centralization because centralization creates economies of scale. There's no doubt about it. But from a malevolent sense, it also means centralization of corruption. One kickback is enough. Not a system of decentralized kickbacks where you've got to pay. People have frankly talked to me about this. They say, sir, we don't want to deal with the panchayats. We've got to pay a kickback to everybody. You tell us one place where we want to pay the money. And because I used to work in corruption too, I actually do a capacity building program of corruption in procurements. And centralizing of procurements is actually paradoxically a way to reduce corruption if you've got a central team with integrity. And there have been excellent models of centralized procurement in India, which actually makes a strong case against decentralization. Look at Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, gold standard in terms of rural development by centralizing, creating central standards, having central quality monitors. In fact, I remember the days when I used to be a member of the National Rural Roads Development Society, perfectly run organization, and using technology those days, I'm talking about 15, 16 years back, they were able to centralize the whole process. Whereas I know what would have happened if we had decentralized it. Everybody would have been on the take and you would have got substandard roads. Today when you see that sign of the the Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, which has now been in place for 22, 23 years, you know that you're going to get a quality road with 5-year maintenance built into the contract. It's very rarely that a road like that goes bad. So we've got experiences where what the contractors say in favor of centralization is a legitimate call upon them. But this is the incentive structure. Now let me come to the next thing. After looking at the incentive structures and after looking at the entire theoretical framework in terms of both the cautionary aspects, how would you design a local government system? Because if you design a local government system, ideally speaking, then you can compare to see whether India favors well or the Indian system fits into this kind of thing. So you have a state action, you have local government, and you have people. And there's a lot of coordination between this. I mean, drinking water is a no-brainer. It is something that has to be delivered. There's not going to be a fight between the local government people or the national government or the state government or the state. When I say the state, I mean everybody above the local. That people require clean, safe drinking water. Now, what you really need to do is to have clear functional assignments which leads to clear roles and responsibilities. Very clear. This is what we call activity mapping. And then you have a fiscal decentralization system. And fiscal decentralization does not mean only grants. It means a taxation system, predictable hard budget constraints. See, listen, if you're going to spend more than this money, I will not bail you out. If you're going to put up high mast electrical lights, which you cannot afford in a place where it is not necessary, and the bill comes to 20,000 rupees a month, I will switch off the electricity if you cannot pay the bill. We don't do it, that's another matter. But a good system should have both clear functional assignments and it should have predictable hard budget constraints and a fiscal envelope. So that leads to a fiscal envelope and clear roles and responsibilities. This is what we call capacity. Capacity building is not training. This is capacity. What I need to do and how I can do it, what is the money that I have that I can access to do what I'm supposed to do. And then you have a capability building system. Once you put pressure on somebody, this is the whole classical theory about supply-driven training and demand-driven training. We've gone through it so often. But there's no point training people who do not know what to do and who haven't been told what to do and who don't have the fiscal envelope. Most of us have been in situations where we talk to Zilla Parishad presidents or somebody, Panchayat members, and they say, yes, I was elected with great expectations, but when I landed up on the ground, I find that I have absolutely no money. So what are you telling me? Why are you giving me these, why are you giving me these motherhood statements that I am empowered, Gandhi said this, and so on and so forth. I cannot do anything on the ground. I cannot even change a street light bulb, right? So a capability building system comes as a response to responsibility, and then you are under pressure. Hey, listen, I have been given so much of power. Now tell me how to do it. And this has happened in India. I remember the first time that NREGA was implemented, there were serious misgivings at Government of India level in 2005-2006, whether the panchayats had the capacity to do so. And I remember that in places like UP, the panchayat presidents the Association of Panchayat Presidents went on a dharna. They said, you're making us do all this, but where is our ability? You have one panchayat secretary for every 9 panchayats. How am I going to deliver this? That is when the union government decided to keep aside 5% for capacity development. And that allocation was given. It's another matter that allocation was never released to the panchayats. Every state centralized it and used it to buy freebies like computers and so on and so forth. But the fact of the matter is that there was a pressure from below when a statutory responsibility of implementing a 100-day guarantee, minimum guarantee, was imposed on the panchayats. That is how you would devolve. You throw the panchayats in the deep end and then they will come back to you and they will ask for the capacities to implement it. Now, once all this has come together, that is when direct and clear accountability happens, and then you have delivery of services, you collect local taxes, and a cycle of interaction begins. A cycle of feedback happens. So what happens is, if either the capability building system is missing, or the fiscal envelope is missing, all the roles and responsibility are missing, and more often than not, all three are missing, then what happens is that there is no direct and clear accountability. Now, what happens is one way of accountability strengthening is that you have an upward frame of accountability through an audit, through a system of audit reporting to the legislature, because after all, the legislature votes in a substantial amount of money that comes to the local government, and a downward framework by which you are supposed to conduct Gram Sabhas, you are supposed to have local audits, and so on and so forth. Now, just to illustrate what this means in an actual context, I will be quoting Karnataka a bit because I worked in Karnataka a lot. Plus, Karnataka is a great state because it has data. It has plenty of data. So when we analyzed about 5 years back from Center for Policy Research, we did a study called Paisa for Panchayats. I can send you reports. It's also available in the public domain. We discovered, the simple question that we asked was, how much money does the government spend in a Gram Panchayat area? Not the Gram Panchayat's expenditure, how much money does the government spend in a Gram Panchayat area? And then we asked the next question, of this money, how much money does the Panchayat actually spend? And what we discovered was amazing. The government spends a huge amount of money. What the respected DG says, 4 lakh crores, you translate it, it's a huge amount of money per Gram Panchayat. In Karnataka, sir, it translates to between 6 to 8 crore rupees then. I'm talking about 7 years back. But guess how much of money the Panchayat actually deals with? About 1 crore. Out of which about 70 to 80 lakhs is NREGA, and Panchayats in Karnataka do collect taxes. In fact, one of the things that's also happening in Telangana, by the way, I have to get the details, but when the finance, sadly, when we asked through the Finance Commission, we didn't get the details, but otherwise I know that there's been a great improvement in local taxation across the south, but Telangana is particularly good. In Karnataka today, local panchayats collect 1,000 crore by way of local taxes. So every panchayat has about 20 lakhs by way of taxes. But the whole point is, for this 20 lakhs of its own money, a little money coming from Swachh Bharat Abhiyan and so on and so forth, and NREGA put together about 1 crore of rupees, they had to undergo social audits, they had to undergo audits. Everything else that the government was spending was unaudited. They didn't have to appear before the, no school teacher, no Anganwadi was actually socially audited. Nobody appeared. And the beauty about this was when I started explaining this report at the field level, when I left the room, everybody was fighting with everybody else. And that's exactly the result that I wanted to achieve. The MLA felt wronged, the Zilla Parishad members felt wrong, the Gram Panchayat members felt wrong, and the people felt wrong. And the NGO said, we never knew that this much of money was being spent. This led to an amendment in the Karnataka law, under which now the Panchayat has been given formal powers of supervision over a whole lot of local institutions, which would not have happened if this report had not come. But has fiscal decentralization happened? Has the money to manage the local institution come down to the Panchayats? Not yet. But that's a battle they are going to fight. Right? So this is what I call an ideal framework, a self-policing framework. This is a self-policing framework because the accountability structure is both upward and downward, and all the other capacities are in place in terms of clear functions, clear fiscal envelope, and the capability. And when I say capability, not training, but the actual capability in terms of staff. This is an idealized system. Now, does it work? I just step back, and these are my last 2 slides on theory, coming from a much criticized article, but in which I find great merit, regardless of whatever he says about India. Yeah, I'm proud of being an Indian, but I think we should be also mature enough to take credit from somebody who's really done some deep thinking. This is done by Lad Pritchett, and this article was published in 2013. It was called India, a Flailing State. Flailing State. And everybody's pride was hurt when he said that we are a flailing state. What did he mean by flailing state? Is it great laws? Head is fabulous, fabulous constitution, fabulous laws, very poor service delivery outcomes. And that largely holds good even today. Even today. So what he said is that you have something called thick accountability, which requires a lot of discretion on the person exercising that discretion, a lot of discretion, and something called thin accountability, where I just have to follow orders. So he said you have a thick accountability and thin accountability, and you have something called narrow scope, where few people sit down and decide something with narrow scope, and broad scope, where many people do it. So if you have this grid, What are the aspects of narrow scope where thick accountability happens? Lawmaking. Lawmaking. And here I must digress to tell you a little interesting story. When the NREGA was designed, there was a clash within the government between the Panchayat people and the anti-Panchayat people. And that happened because the government was, the portfolio was split. One minister of the government was given the power of Panchayati Raj, and a coalition partner minister was given the power for rural development. And the coalition partner minister did not like it. He did not like it. So he decided to be anti-Panchayati Raj. Otherwise, he was a fine minister. Poor gentleman passed away, Dr. Raghunandan. So when they produced, and the Rural Development Ministry produced the draft of the NREGA, believe it or not, it had no role for the panchayats. No role for the panchayats. So we in the Ministry of Panchayati Raj were called to provide our comments, and we gave scathing comments. The Prime Minister told us that we will put it up in Parliament, and there will be a parliamentary committee. An all-party committee would be constituted to look into it. An all-party committee was constituted to look into it, and it was headed by the late Mr. Kalyan Singh, whom for various reasons I was not very fond of. But that gentleman was a remarkable man in terms of his application and dedication to Panchayati Raj, whatever else he might have been. He produced a recommendation which strongly advocated that Panchayat should be the implementing body. But ultimately it came to the Ministry of Panchayati Raj to actually draft those provisions. And I still remember my boss, Mr. Wajad Habibullah, we sat in a little council of war, and ultimately as a joint secretary in charge, he told me to shut my mouth, not write long notes, and he said, exactly, this is the law, tell me where you want to change. And I cut off words with red ink and wrote roughly what I needed to change. And don't ask me how, but those changes did happen. So I keep looking at that NREGA Act and said, how much by a thin thread the fate of that act hung. And it was an act that was a watershed in terms of empowering the panchayats by giving the panchayats a mandated space in implementation. I think it was one of the first union government acts. I think the earlier one was the Biodiversity Act. Subsequently, there have been several acts like the Right to Education Act, etc. But the NREGA was a watershed in terms of the union government directly empowering the panchayats. But that was thick accountability. Now, when you come to implementation, intensive service delivery, imposition of obligations where there are a lot of discretion, health, education, nutrition. These are areas where there's a lot of discretion at the local level. So there is thick accountability on the doctor, thick accountability on the Anganwadi worker, etc. But if you come to thin accountability, the logistics, postal services, elections, where you just have to follow instructions, just follow an algorithm that has been set for you. Now what he said was, he said that India does pretty well here. We do modestly well here. For such a large country, we run a lot of algorithmic operations in this country quite well. Sadly, we take it for granted, but we actually do it quite well. For the scale and size of this country, staggering scale, we do some things quite well. But this is pretty much becoming a difficult thing. This is something that has happened, we've seen. I mean, I've lived through the emergency. I've lived through authoritarian state governments, where decision making is sometimes just based on whimsy. It's based on propaganda, it's based on whimsy. We don't have internal party democracy in almost every party from the left to the right. And if you see across India, the case studies, I don't want to name people, it's controversial, but if you look at chief ministers, we have authoritarian chief ministers across the board, across all political complexions. Sometimes they think up good things. Sometimes they think up good things, but sometimes they don't. And sometimes they don't like discussion. So that is not very great here. But here, that is the big problem. We have still an organizational disaster when it comes to the delivery of dispersed services of thick accountability. Whether it's nutrition, whether it's food distribution, whether it is health, whether it is education, things are fast changing, but they are still quite bad. We don't compare well with many other countries, right? So what he was saying was that this rot of badly delivering services with thick accountability is contagious. It can spread to the thin accountability issues. It can also move upward towards the policy making levels. For example, let me just give you an example. If you look at the organizational disaster in terms of delivery of health, education, etc., how does it translate to rot in the political system? in the widespread, well-known system of transfers for payment of money. In every state after state now, it's an open secret, and there have been scandals. There was a scandal in Karnataka the other day, where an additional DG of police was suspended, was arrested actually, because there was a scandal in recruitment. So he says that the rot in service delivery can spread, which means that we need to contain that rot. Then you go back to whether containing that rot can be done through that local government system that I showed in the previous slide. A self-correcting system at the local level can actually contain that rot if it was properly empowered. And that is the theoretical basis. I hope you are able to connect this with what is happening in India. Because if I tell you what is happening in India without this theoretical foundation on which it stands, then you might not be able to understand what the solutions can be. Because the solution is to actually drive towards the previous slide, which is to have a self-policing system at the local level. So now let us look at the journey thus far. As I said, I think the biggest and the most significant achievement on this journey has been the political journey. This is something that we as bureaucrats and even as students and academicians, we tend to undermine. Please do not undermine the fact that 3.2 million people have been elected to that level. It is easy to disparage them. It is easy to read the newspaper reports about the bad eggs. When you have 3.2 million people, obviously there will be a few things that go wrong. But the fact is that this is a revolution-causing system. Sadly, and this is why I want to highlight some of the shortcomings. The biggest shortcoming is that the representation system is now being increasingly distorted. One of the first problems, and this is something I have an argument with my former boss, Mr. Iyer, and we disagree on this. I told him, sir, I think that you just made the reservation system so complex in the Constitution. It is some of the most detailed provisions in the Constitution, and yet it leaves certain things in grey area. For example, it says rotation of reservations will happen for a term. What is a term? Now, I know that Ms. Jayalalitha, when she was the Chief Minister, there was a delegation of women who went to her and she slowed down the reservation rotation to 10 years, which created a solid incentive for women to get re-elected. Otherwise, every woman who stood for election knew that next time around the term would be rotated, and there was no incentive to perform at all. We recommended to many states. We went around the states getting MOU signed, including then with undivided Andhra Pradesh, but no Chief Minister was willing to do what she did. Now worse, in Maharashtra and Karnataka, the presidents of the panchayats are rotated by law every 30 months. I was part of a committee in Karnataka that actually negated this, and we went and got the amendment in the law. The amendment was again reversed through an ordinance. And you know, in actuality, the rotation is every 10 months. Why? Why is this being done? So what has happened is that the Constitution itself provided the scope for this kind of distortion. But then the second part, and that is very, very sad. I have a complete analysis of this separately that I have written. We had the great case of Gujarat, Ahmedabad municipality case, where the Supreme Court took a decision. What's it? What Parmar? Something Singh Parmar, versus where the state government postponed the Ahmedabad municipality elections, and the Supreme Court said you cannot. Because the words in the Constitution, Article 243K, if I am not mistaken, and its urban equivalent, it says that the term of a panchayat shall be 5 years and no more. And no more. And it also says that if a panchayat is superseded, then election shall be held within 6 months of that supervision, but the overall term shall not exceed 5 years. Which means that if a panchayat is superseded after 2.5 years, within the next 6 months an election has to be held, but the term of the next body will also end for the remaining period of the 5 years. After that it will end. Every state government has misinterpreted this deliberately to say that we can actually extend the elections for 6 months beyond 5 years. And the Supreme Court has struck down so badly on this, but yet they cannot do it. There have been rampant number of postponements of the panchayat elections. I think it will be useful for NIRDPR to compile case studies of this. It makes for very sad reading of what has happened. In fact, Now there's a technique of doing it. There's a technique of doing it. One is to disempower the state election commissioners. I know state election commissioners whose petrol budget has been cut. One state election commissioner, she objected in West Bengal, she objected to the postponement of elections. They filed an FIR on her. You know what was the case against her? That she used a government flag on a taxi. But the fact of the matter is she was authorized to use a taxi by the government. And a few NGOs, and I was part of that process, we went to the Supreme Court and got the Supreme Court to order that the election should be held. In Karnataka, when the elections were postponed, since I'm a lawyer, I filed a PIL. I appeared in myself arguing my case. And at the end of the day, the Advocate General sought adjournment to the next day, and by the next day the notification had been issued because they just could not refute what I was saying. And the mood of the court was also very clear that they would pass strictures on the state government. Then, now there's the other thing that is happening is gerrymandering of constituencies. Just before the elections are going to be announced, this happened in Delhi through a union act. It happened in Delhi. It is happening in Karnataka repeatedly with the city corporation. Just when the elections are going to be announced, they say we're going to enlarge the city corporation. We are going to increase the number of wards from 200 to 230. And then they go back to the court and the court is frustrated. Elections have been postponed in many states. And then they make constituencies in the shape of snakes, in the shape of donuts, etc. so that appropriate constituencies can be created to ensure that the party in power can win the next elections. Unfortunately, the courts have been seen to be helpless in spite of this Supreme Court Constitutional Judge bench decision. So this is a big problem, and it will be good to actually document this and create a groundswell. It is not serving any political party, because what one political party does, the next political party will oppose. But when they come to power, they do exactly the same thing. And so this is a big problem. Then you have, of course, the political commitment to decentralize. This I will not say no. I have met people across the board, across political ideologies, who commit to decentralize. And you must remember that at the end of the day, the constitution was amended by a minority government which secured two-thirds majority. It secured two-thirds majority. If you go back and look at the 64th Amendment debates, and if you go back and look at the 73rd Amendment debates, there were some very interesting points raised by people who opposed it. But end of the day, there was a consensus for the 75th, 74th, 73rd and 74th Amendment. Then comes the piloting of provisions, decentralization laws. I was head of the assessment team for the 14th Finance Commission, and we did an analysis of the Panchayati Raj acts of every state. That report is also available as with respect to the core functions. And we discovered, contrary to public perception, there are no champions and there are no failures in Panchayati Raj when it comes to the legal mandate. The laws of Punjab are as strong as the laws of Kerala when it comes to Gram Panchayats. When it comes to intermediate Panchayats, there's variation. But the maximum variation is when it comes to district Panchayats. You have the states that are completely inimical to district Panchayats, and there are states that are strong district Panchayat systems. The strong district Panchayat systems are Karnataka, Gujarat, Maharashtra. They are getting diluted to some extent. Kerala is pretty weak when it comes to district Panchayats. So was the erstwhile Andhra Pradesh state, Haryana, Odisha, Punjab. These states do not strengthen their district Panchayats. So, but at the same time, at the Gram Panchayat level, there is a broad consensus that the Panchayat must be the service delivery institution at the local level from a legal standpoint. Then comes a dilution. Functional assignments. How many states have actually done activity mapping? Very few. We've been pursuing this ever since Mr. Venkaiah Naidu was a minister, and he created a task force in 2001 based on a parliamentary committee report. The parliamentary committee was headed by the then MP Manishankar Iyer. There was an all-party consensus that there must be activity mapping. This was recommended by the then Rural Development Ministry. And I happened to be a member of that task force, and that task force became the gold standard on the basis of which even today we are asking states to undertake functional assignments. Again, very few states have actually done so. Resistance from Finance Ministry. Budget window for fiscal transfers. The 13th Finance Commission actually said that we will not release the incentive grants to the states unless they create a budget window. All that the states did was to create a separate tiny window and put a few of the rural development grants into that budget window. That was not the intention. The intention was that if you have devolved functions across health, education, family welfare, everything, all those departments would carve out a part of their budget and put it into the budget envelope, which now only 6 states or 5 states do. Kerala does it the best because they have got an annexure in their budget that takes the money right down to the Gram Panchayat level. Karnataka does it pretty well by way of what is known as a district sector budget in their budget. Only thing is that the allocation within the district sector has diminished from 24% to 17%. It's hovering around 17%. And we have noticed another very pernicious thing. Wherever the panchayats have discretion, that money is slowly taken away from the discretionary budget, the district sector budget. So the district sector budget is largely salary payments. So what is happening is Karnataka claims big credit for decentralization, but actually what they are doing is using the taluk and the zilla panchayats as giant ATM machines. They technically all the staff are with the panchayats, right? And their salaries are paid through the panchayats, and then they go to the government and say, see, we are devolving so much of money. But wherever discretion is there for implementing or formulating a program, there's been creeping centralization. We've also listed out those schemes and given it to Karnataka, but they're not taking much action. But now there are more pernicious ways in which you can control panchayats. Actual release of funds. Analysis of the release of funds of the 14th and the 15th Finance Commission shows that there were significant shortfalls. 13th and 14th Finance Commission shows that there were significant shortfalls in payment to the states. This is something again documented in our report to the 15th Finance Commission. Then comes control through restricted delegation of powers. Do you know that in almost every state, as far as Finance Commission grants are concerned now, they say that along with the signature of the Panchayat President, the signature of the BDO or somebody has to be taken. Which means actually just 10% bribe has to be paid to the senior level officer, and there has to be an unhealthy collaboration between the Panchayat President, because the Panchayat Presidents are also not very clean people. If you look at election expenditures of Panchayat members, it's horrendous now. Particularly in peri-urban areas where the expenditures can be very huge. So procurement processes have been centralized, delegation of financial powers have been centralized, and monitoring power is centralized, and that is the final outcome. So what happens is the political commitment is huge and the final outcome is very, very poor because of this progressive dilution at every step. And each one of this can be documented. Now, when I come to functional assignments, this is what I said. The other big problem about functional assignments is the perpetuation of parallel structures. The DRDA still continues, right? There was a report by Mr. V. Ramachandran, Padma Vibhushan, saying that the DRDA must be dismantled. It was not dismantled. That report came out in 2014. And I know exactly what happened. The minister was in favor of dismantling it. There was an FA in the Ministry of Rural Development who put her foot down and said no. And that was it. One bureaucrat was able to block. And so the DRDA still continues. So with what word can the Rural Development Ministry say we will want to strengthen Panchayati Raj if the Rural Development Ministry of Government of India is unwilling and the political dispensation changed? The previous political dispensation was unwilling. The current political dispensation has also not touched it. Why? Because the bureaucrats' resistance to this continues. So tell me as an outsider why I should trust any bureaucrat to be interested in Panchayati Raj when you cannot even dismantle the DRDA. Smart City project. Complete travesty. They have created a separate SPV. It's not with the city municipality. Then you come to courts displaying a lack of understanding of devolution. Again, this is something documented, so I am not committing any contempt of court. If you read Mr. Shivaramakrishna's book, he has done a brilliant analysis of court judgments. I myself have gone to the National Judicial Academy and spoken in the National Judicial Academy to judges, and I must say I was startled by their sincere ignorance of the provisions of the 73rd and 74th Amendment. They just thought that the deputy commissioner is everything, and that is it. The district collector is everything, and the panchayats are some kind of agency institutions below them. That is the mindset. So what has happened is, if you read the judgment relating to upholding of MP lads and MLA lads, there was a particular aspect raised in that case that MPs and MLAs cannot implement actions of the local government according to Article 243N of the Constitution. Article 243N of the Constitution says compliance of other laws to the Panchayati Raj Act. It says if after 1 year of the coming into force of the Constitution, any provision of any law, it says actually any provision of any law which contradicts or violates the provisions of the Panchayati Raj Act shall ipso facto be annulled. And the Supreme Court has passed an inexplicable judgment in which they say, no, it has no application. That's a very funny case because this has happened in Bangalore, where there was a land acquisition by the Bangalore Development Authority, which is a pre-73rd, 74th Amendment parallel body. And one of the issues, in fact, I ghost wrote a part of that representative, I was still in the government, saying that that body has no locus standi to exist because of Article 243N. Surprise, surprise, we won in the High Court. The single devolution in the, if I remember correctly, 12th Finance Commission was 8,000 crores. No, 11th Finance Commission was 8,000 crores. 12th Finance Commission was 20,000 crores. 13th Finance Commission was 80,000 crores. 14th Finance Commission was 2,40,000 crores. There's a monumental increase, huge increase. Now, the 13th Finance Commission started introducing the concept of performance grants with conditionalities, which in my opinion failed. State governments just did the paperwork to show that they have met the conditionalities. 14th Finance Commission said only 2 conditionalities. Your own revenue should increase year upon year, and then there must be an audit of your panchayats. That was a simple set of conditionalities to implement. But when the 14th Finance Commission issued these orders, creating this quantum jump from 80,000 crores to 2,50,000 crores, what happened was this, because we were consultants to the 15th Finance Commission, and we saw the slow movement of fund disbursements. But the most important thing was there was something called mission creep. This is where a dear friend of mine who was then in the ministry and I differ violently on this. They created this monster called GPDP. And through this monster called GPDP, the government of India started issuing directives on how the panchayat should spend their entitled funds. In spite of the fact that the 14th Finance Commission expressly said no further conditionality shall be levied, shall be put on our devolution, and Government of India accepted that. Government of India accepted the 14th Finance Commission's recommendations in toto and then went along creeping up. They started issuing guidelines. All the guidelines, they said we will tie the money down to this. And this became the handle for officers to grab at the local level and direct all panchayats to prepare uniform plans. Because officers are waiting for an opportunity to do this. Entitled money was taken away from the panchayats. These are done by Accountability Initiative to the 15th Finance Commission. So these are all the instructions that were issued by the union government restricting the use of 14th Finance Commission entitled funds. All these orders, you can read them one after the other. And these are some of the field experiences that we collected. We found that in Bihar, the entire thing was diverted towards a Mukhyamantri Saath Nischay program. Entire allocation was diverted. So what happened to devolution? These are some of the people that don't call 14th Finance Commission money untied. The release of funds is followed with clear instructions from the state on what we can spend it and we cannot deviate from that. These are actual words of panchayat members that we collected. So there's a huge circular Raj that is going on. In every state, panchayat members are faced with circulars upon circulars, which actually put the deputy commissioner, district collector and the BDO as de facto decision makers on behalf of the panchayats. Counter signature is required by senior officers. At source deduction of funds. This is something that you see for electricity bills, money is deducted at source. I have been prohibited from my son to talk about this at the dining table because my wife used to be in the electricity sector and this nearly led to our divorce because I was Panchayati Raj secretary and she was finance director of the electricity board. So my son said he doesn't like the sight of blood. And so he would not like his mother and father to discuss electricity bills of panchayats at the dining table. But this is what they would do. They would not bill the panchayats, and they would levy interest upon interest and withdraw money from the fund for something like 18 to 20 years in a well-performing state like Karnataka. Capacity building, we are just missing the wood for the trees. I'm sorry to say this. I know all of you are doing very sincere training, but your training counts for nothing. All your training counts for nothing. Please go and intern with a panchayat president. I'll select some good panchayat presidents. Go and intern with them and find out whether they are interested in your training program or not. They are battling with daily problems. They're saying, in fact, after training programs, you know what they say? In our state, Karnataka training programs are good, very good. Circulars have been issued by the government, empowering the panchayat members and assigning tasks to the officers working under them. But a panchayat member calls me up and says, sir, my PDO, the panchayat development officer, doesn't show me the circular. So now we have created 230 WhatsApp groups, one for every taluk, and 30 presidents or 40 presidents in each taluk, and the circulars are now being sent through a parallel system, not the government system. So people are printing out the circulars and saying, okay, you don't show me the circular, this is the circular. I mean, it's descended to that level of competition at the local level. So the problem is that there is a high level of dissatisfaction, and the rage and anger and dissatisfaction is directed against that poor creature called your trainer, who's there on the ground, who's been trained to say something, and he or she lands up there and there's a completely different story emerging from the members. And then the members are waiting outside, they're signing their TA bills, having chai and going out. RGPSA money spent. Utilization certificate, UC means you don't see actually. It's just signed and sent. So this is the whole point. So who controls whom to what extent? What is the actual expenditure incurred by elected representatives? That's another problem. They say they're all corrupt. Go and stay with a panchayat member. Do you know how much a panchayat member spends on legitimate government work every month? We estimated it. I did a project called the GPOD project. We actually followed panchayat members and started noting down the time that they spend and the money that they spent on whatever. In Karnataka. You can do this in many other states. Now in Karnataka there's a very simple thing. People have reached a level where they understand what a panchayat member should do. It might not tally with my view of what a panchayat member should do, but they know that if the water supply fails, if the electricity fails, if the street light fails, the panchayat member has got to fix it. If the panchayat member does not fix it, they come to the panchayat member's house and beat him up. Right? So what does a panchayat member do? He or she, if a bulb fuses, will buy a bulb and fit it. I have seen panchayat members running up, debts of 60 to 80,000 rupees doing government work. A panchayat member spends between 20 to 25,000 rupees every month on just chai, somebody's wedding, following up a bill, going on a scooter somewhere, loading up some cement, paying that chap who's loading the cement $100. Who pays for that? Nobody. So they corrupt. It's called need-based corruption as against greed-based corruption. But the fact is that you have an opening towards corruption, and then need-based becomes an alibi for greed-based. And you cannot separate the two. Right? So we approached the state government and said, we submitted a report to the state government and we said, this is what is paid. Please increase the remuneration that you're going to pay. Or let's have a deal like this. Panchayats in Karnataka are collecting their own taxes. Right? You allow those panchayats which are collecting taxes at least to increase the sitting fee or give a salary or something to an elected representative, because that elected representative is actually a much cheaper way to get organizational capacity as compared to you recruiting somebody through the State Public Service Commission, putting that person there, giving a pension, this, etc. So this money is something that you're going to pay for something like a unpaid internship. And I teach in Switzerland, so when I actually go and visit the communes. Right? Do you know that in Switzerland, when a local government elected representative is elected, he or she signs a contract, a consultancy contract with the local body and commits X amount of time per week and is paid for that time that he or she commits to the local government. They complain, they say it's not enough. But it's at least a system. Now in Kerala they give I think 8,000 rupees to a panchayat member and up to 14,000 rupees for a president. In Karnataka it's still 1,000 rupees. So day before yesterday I was sitting with, we've got a panchayat association and they want to make this into an agitation. And my point was, listen, if you're going to ask state government, they're not going to give you the money. They think that you're all anyway corrupt. And you're not asking for it either. But there are honest people in the system, right? There are poor people who forsake their daily wages to come and do panchayat work, right? And they are not compensated. So another way of doing it is when you give an agency function. See, many departments today, I talked about dysfunctionality of thick accountability activity at the ground level. Many departments do not have field level staff to do things like cattle census, various other surveys, etc. They ask the panchayat people to do it. So I remember this very good panchayat secretary, who is a good dear friend of mine. He put up on his Facebook page a coconut tree with coconuts, with bananas, with mangoes, and he said, this is a panchayat secretary, which is exactly it. You're expecting the panchayat secretary to produce all kinds of fruit, but he has a coconut tree, right? So the point is, let a department that wants to do something at the panchayat level sign an agency agreement and give 5% of its allocation to the panchayats for the administrative capacity. Unless you do that, once you do that, then the panchayat member is going to turn to NIRD or an SIRD and say, hey, listen, I've got this agency function. Tell me how to do it. Your training program becomes demand driven. They want problems to be solved, not motherhood statements. And sadly, there's a lot of... So what is happening is training is infused with propaganda, empty sloganeering, homilies, instructions and directives. I remember an NGO program where I went where the panchayat members were sleeping on the floor. They had paid the money. They asked them, I said, why are you here to listen to me? In SIRD, you get nice rooms and everything. They say, sir, if we go to SIRD, they tell us what not to do. You tell us what we can do. That's the difference. In SIRD, all the instructions they get is, don't do this, you will get caught by audit. Don't do this, you will get caught by vigilance. But you tell us what we can do. That's the difference. All the rights-based content is now getting out of the panchayat system. Earlier, there were a lot of, including Government of India's very good program called Mahila Samakhya. They did fabulous work in the first 10 years in just empowering women to stand for elections, doing election candidate campaigns and things like that. They are all now starved of funds. So that's the problem. Everybody is throwing the... and then you come to technology. I teach in the Masuri Academy, and while I really think that the IAS quality has become so good, it's become so diverse, all kinds of people from all kinds of backgrounds are coming in, but the one worry that I have is everybody thinks technology is a magic wand. I assess their dissertations, and nobody is looking for an institutional solution that is self-policing. That was my intention. Sir, housing, we'll put a satellite, we'll put drones, we'll put this, we'll do that, we'll everything, and we will decide who gets the benefit. Now we are just starting a study in accountability initiative as to the dynamic of what is known as a data entry operator. Check this, it's very interesting. We got some fabulous case studies of how data entry operators are becoming really the kingpins of a panchayat. It's not the panchayat president any longer. I remember that I wrote this in my book also. I mean, I had a piece of property. Karnataka has done some great work in linking up documentation. So when you buy a property as a non-agricultural property, it disappears from the revenue record and it's supposed to appear on the panchayat record. All this is promised under Right to Services Act, supposed to be done within 45 days. It did not happen. I said, let me wait. So it did not happen. It did not happen for 19 months. Finally, I went to that guy and said, hey, listen, this has not happened and I've got a Right to Services SMS. What they did was they promptly deleted the SMS. I said, how can you delete the SMS and say that this has been solved when it's not solved? No, sir, it was showing up as a pendency. So the clerk from the DC's office said, we cannot have such embarrassing pendencies. So we deleted it. I said, but you deleted it without giving me what I need. Then I said, please get me this. Oldest trick in the game. Sir, I've lost the dongle. Dongle ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ sir. So I said, okay, you're in Kolar, 70 kilometers from Bangalore. Just go to Bangalore and get your new dongle and you use a new dongle and give me my document. No sir, I can't go to Bangalore because sufficient number of dongles have not been lost. So I said, shall I arrange a dacoity and steal some 20 dongles so that you can go into Bangalore and collect 20 dongles and make it a cost-effective operation. Finally, he gave it to me. I didn't pay a bribe. But it's really amazing how officers come up with technological solutions and do not look at the human dynamics of how the technological solution changes the power at the local level. And they imagine that the technology solution has solved the problem. So it doesn't solve the problem. So be very wary of anybody that you call here who gives you a good PowerPoint presentation. Because power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. Don't do this technology stuff with too many animations and all that. So what can we do to revive this? Right? I made it funny because otherwise you'll start crying, right? It's really quite sad, but it's also funny in a way. Prison humor. So the political solution, I think, is the most important thing. And that is something that we are not going to participate in unless you people quit and understand what the political solutions are. And the good part of the political solution is, I believe, cutting across all parties, there is a clientele for democratic decentralization. This is something that I have noticed. They are in a minority in their parties, whether it's the far right or the far left, or anybody in between. But there is a consensus that is emerging. And where this consensus emerges as a political force is through a Panchayat association. And there I would strongly recommend that you look at the Kerala model. Kerala is a highly contested political space. Everybody wears their political affiliation on their shoulder. And that is so at the Gram Panchayat level also, because it is one of the few states where we are honest enough to say that party-based elections will be held at the GP level. In my opinion, that is the way to go. Because if you do not have party-based elections at the GP level, it's naive to assume that people are not politicized. Everybody is politicized. Might as well put it out there, right? But the Panchayat association is non-political. Elections in the Panchayat association are based on a consensus where if the president belongs to X group, then the secretary is from Y group. And now they've got an engineered solution where if government takes any policy decision relating to panchayats, the associations are called. And the associations sit down there and they discuss and they decide. They have a voice. Now the same thing is not appearing to develop elsewhere in other states, but I think that is a very good way. I think you should turn your NIRD could do this. That's my if I can achieve this through my visit, I'll be very grateful. NIRD should start talking to the judges. We guys are no good talking to the judges. But NIRD should have an engagement with the National Judicial Academy. Really high level. Give them a content. By the way, judges don't like training. They believe they are untrainable or they're beyond training. So they never call their training programs. They call it seminar. Call it by whatever name. But organize a seminar for those judges on the true implications of the 73rd and 74th Amendments. You are the best place to do this because you've got credibility, you are there in the center of it. This is the kind of capacity building that we look to you. We look upon you. It judges media. Of course, we deal with the local media. There's a lot of interest amongst the local decentralized social media networks. There's a terrific network of Dalit women in UP. I forget the name, but we're trying to get them to engage with the panchayats more and more so that they don't look upon panchayats as standardized oppressors, right? And they are doing some neutral coverage, but you need to get them to talk positively. But talking to national level media about the structural changes that we require is something that we need to do. We are trying to set up peer learning systems. Peer learning systems, again, evolved during, I think it's very good if you try to do a understanding of what happened during COVID. I'm sure you know what happened during COVID. The officers were not able to go to the field. So the panchayats emerged as the only point of recourse for field level functionaries. In Karnataka, I can say with confidence that the hostility that the Anganwadi group or the ASHA workers have for panchayat members actually began to evaporate during the COVID time, because they realized that it was only the panchayats who were helping them out. Not only going along with them, but also things like with money, helping out in actually getting things done, because it was everybody's problem at the local level, and there was no interference from senior officers. Kerala started a system of webinars, and I participated in a few of them, and then I realized that in a Kerala webinar where much of the conversation was happening in Malayalam, there's somebody popping up from Punjab and said, "आप जरा हिंदी में बात कीजिए, please. हमें तो समझ में नहीं आती. Please." It's wonderful. People started checking out from other states. Now we are trying to do it in Karnataka through the Panchayat Parishad. The Panchayat Parishads were created in every state. I am sure, just do a study of where they are today. In Delhi, the Panchayat Parishad, the National Panchayat Parishad was hijacked by a group of people, because the Patparganj municipality, the Gram Panchayat then, had given them a piece of land which is today worth 1,000 crores. And they become defunct in every state. But the Rural Development Minister of the state is a de facto chairperson. In Karnataka, we've had a remarkable consensus in spite of the people in the Parishad being political rivals of the minister. In spite of that, the Parishad has actually been revived, and it's been doing something. I'm a consultant to the Parishad. So the idea is to organize things which the SIRD will feel embarrassed to say. An SIRD or a secretary cannot say certain things against the government. So the idea is that we work as an agency sitting outside, but explaining the true import of some of these assignments and fiscal decentralization. I think the work has to continue. I find that there are not many people doing research into this, sadly. Not many people are doing this. We've been doing. Many of these things are important, such as clarifying the agency functions of local governments through contracts, reform of fund flow mechanisms through state treasuries. There's been tremendous computerization, possibility of transparency portals. We used to talk about transparency portals 10 years back, but I think now we have a really good chance. It's beyond the scope of this lecture. I think I've exceeded time also to do this. And as far as local governments, local taxes are concerned, I think NIRD is also doing a lot of work. I find that the union government has now started quite a lot of work in terms of listing out all the house properties, and that's a good way of, if it doesn't get centralized, if the database is not centralized and used for some other purpose, if it is actually used by the local government to improve their tax capacities, I think what the union government is doing, they put out 200 crore in the last budget. I think that's going to be very useful for this. Accounting systems, I am very sad to say, this has been going on for 25 years. But yet, the simple proof of the pudding is in the eating. Can I go today onto the internet and get the accounts? No, I can't. There's some or the other reason why I'm not able to get the accounts. Either it's in PDF, so it's not interoperable. I cannot download it and do comparisons. So what is happening is, while there are claims made by state government that all the accounts have been computerized, I don't think it's true. I have not seen any large-scale analysis, and I was severely disillusioned when we started doing the consultancy work for the 15th Finance Commission. We told the 15th Finance Commission that it will be a piece of cake. We can do this because all the states have invested a lot of money in accounting and putting out account details. No, it's just not true. Again, not something that I can elaborate on here, but I've got a lot of information on this. So, ultimately, what would you want to aim? This is my last slide. I'm just looking at the fiscal solution, because there's a simplistic way. Maybe I'm still thinking simplistically, but I do believe that if a fiscal solution comes, then everything else tends to fit in, is one feeling. So in a poor area, you don't expect that much of own revenue to come, but not so poor areas, you get own revenue. So you got a dramatic, and I'm sure if you check up in Telangana, it will be the same. We've got a dramatic variation. We've got panchayats in Karnataka today with revenues of 60, 70 crore. There are 18 panchayats in whose property the international airport falls. They're collecting taxes. All peri-urban panchayats, of course, it's led to a very terrible thing, which means that a panchayat member spends 2 to 3 crore for getting elected. but they've got tremendous own revenue capacity. So there's a big variation over here. Basic capacities. You've got to provide every panchayat with an organizational capability. I think the time has come for every panchayat to have a junior engineer, every panchayat to have a logically, empowered, secretariat with enough staff. Of course, there's a lot of variation in terms of size of panchayats, but even if you club the states into 4 or 5 categories, depending on the average size of a panchayat, you can create a basic capacity, and you should give them that capacity. I am calculating that in monetary terms, not necessarily in people's terms. I think you need to give every panchayat a holding harmless fund. No panchayat should be left out. Even the poorest, even the richest panchayat will say, hey, listen, I need some money coming from the union government. So you give them all the holding harmless funds, and then you create an equalization grant. Now, an equalization grant should be level, right? Why am I giving a greater equalization grant to the poorer panchayats? Why am I being more in favor of that? Is because if you have incentive grants and borrowings, that can be something that can top up for a richer gram panchayat. So when you have a system like this, you will find that every panchayat is more or less the redistributive function, which I talked about. My first slide was about Musgrave and redistribution being one of the functions. Your redistribution ability is not in the union government or the state government trying to do what a panchayat should do. Your redistribution ability and your redistribution potential is to create a fiscal architecture that will ensure this to be delivered. Yeah. Because I am calculating on the basis of a certain basic capacity. Let me give you an example. We have a panchayat with, I'm taking a state, because in a state the panchayat average sizes are more or less the same. It's very difficult to compare. Let's say Andhra Pradesh, erstwhile Andhra Pradesh I think had something like 22,000 gram panchayats for approximately the same population as Karnataka. Karnataka only had 6,000, 5,500, now 6,000. So the average size is more. Now, if I am in a panchayat just outside Bangalore, or if I'm a panchayat somewhere in Bidar, my contention is all the panchayat should have a secretary, should have a panchayat development officer, should have a junior engineer, should have, let's say, 5 people looking at the sanitary aspects, a social mobilizer, that kind of stuff. That is there. But then, if a panchayat that is close to Bangalore has a tax capacity of 75 crore, right? It means that people will pay for much higher quality of services. Like, for example, there are panchayats just next to where I live. I live on the border within the city, but there's a place just outside. It's got a complete gated community of ex-army people. They've tried to stand for election this time, they didn't get elected, but next time they're going to get elected to the panchayats. And they are resisting joining the panchayat. Now what they have been telling me is, we will have a world-class garbage disposal kind of a system, better than your city corporation. For that they will need something extra money. They say we need a vehicle. Our panchayat members are not going to travel around on cycles or something like this. Is a peri-urban area. If your municipal area has got a vehicle, we are going to put underground drainage. We need vehicles, etc. That will be extra. But that you spend out of your own revenue. The idea is you spend that out of our own revenue. From the state, this is the capacity that we promise. We from the state will give you a certain capacity. Of course, it's possible for you to create slabs also. There used to be a system in the past where you said classified panchayats as group A, like municipalities. You would say group A, group B, group C. Sometimes what happens is there's a lot of politicking in which group you get put and things like that. That's why I'm playing it safe by saying a uniform thing. And anyway, this is a rough kind of a framework. But the idea is that you have a place for each thing. The actual nuance and the slope of the curve will depend upon what formula you write and how you calculate it. This is just a framework to think out the process. Right then, so that's where I stop. Yeah, have I exceeded time? Slightly, I think, yeah. So thank you, and I hope that I'm not... No, I'm sure I've stepped on a lot of feet, but that's the way I am. I'm not going to apologize for it. But I do hope that some of the things that I've said will prompt some of you to think. But I really hope that some of you young people will join politics. Because that's where the solution is. That's where the real solution is. It's not in the bureaucracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your penetrative insights. And there were significant takeaways. I'm sure it has immensely benefited all of us. I now invite my senior colleague, Dr. Anjan Bhanja, heading Center for Panchayati Raj, to moderate the question and answer sessions.
Thank you, sir. This is really a thought-provoking presentation. You have provided a lot of food for thought. So now we can invite 2-3 questions because we are running shortage of time. Only 2-3 questions you can invite. Please come forward. Yeah. Microphone.
Sir, you spoke about mapping, but we also did a lot of work on activity mapping. But it seems it is ideologically smart, but it's not a smooth sailing without proper devolution of fund, function, and functionality. Please comment upon it.
I agree. I agree. I think I agree. I think that, can you hear me? I think tactically we made a mistake. I remember the time when activity mapping was being thought of in the ministry and all that. That period, from 2004 to 2009. Our hypothesis was that we will create a framework for activity mapping and we will push it, and fiscal devolution will follow sequentially. I think we made a mistake. We should have sold both together. But also, the fear was that if you push fiscal decentralization along with this, then people will be so intimidated. Officers who are, as it is, not interested, would be so intimidated that they would do neither. So what has happened now in activity mapping is that states have picked bits and pieces of it and done it. For example, in Rajasthan, in 2013, 5 GOs were issued, which have devolved 5 subjects. So water sanitation, social welfare, education, a few others, they've given it. So I would now downscale my ambitions on activity mapping and say that you please leave out the economic sector from activity mapping. States are not going to devolve things like agriculture, horticulture, fisheries, forestry, sericulture. I find that group of people are quite inimical to it. Concentrate on what the 14th Finance Commission calls as core sectors. And if you can get activity mapping done in core sectors, implemented at the panchayat level, then it might slowly create confidence in other departments to proceed with activity mapping elsewhere. So trying to do it for all 29, I think tactically might be unsurmountable at this point.
Please elaborate why it is so.
GPDP.
And the supplementary question in line with that. Sir, I am now Director in charge for NRLM-RC. So yesterday we had a meeting with Joint Secretary NRLM, Anita Kejriwal Madam, and Dr. Anjan and Dilip sir also were there with me. The context is how to integrate a village poverty reduction plan with the GPDP. So how we can take forward the capacity building programs of integrating the BPRP with GPDP. So what is that now in line before us, keeping your comment on the GPDP as a monster?
You read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. No? You read the book, right? A well-meaning person does something very horrible. That is exactly what has happened with GPDP. If the 14th Finance Commission, please read the report of the 14th Finance Commission. The 14th Finance Commission's rationale for increasing the allocation from 80,000 crores to 2,40,000 crore was that, and that is a report they asked us to prepare, and we prepared it from Center for Policy. They said, these are the core sectors. You don't have to identify what the core sectors are. We are going to tell you what the core sectors are. What are the core sectors? Community assets, roads and bridges, water and sanitation, street lights, and one more. Five. Five things were listed out by them as the core sectors. They said, in these core sectors, you please tell us how much money is being spent by the Panchayat now, what is the standard of service delivery that you want, and what is the gap. We calculated all that based on the data, and we said this is the gap, right? And then we said this is the amount that you need to close the gap over a period of 5 years. So the clear intention of the Finance Commission was that using this money, they will close the gap in delivery of core services. They were not interested in anything else. We gave it to them. The allocation that the Finance Commission gave was actually slightly more than our recommendation. We were absolutely thrilled. So they gave that money. And they said that the union government shall not issue a single guideline further to that. Why did you issue the GPDP guideline? Because good people there lusted for control over that money. They didn't like the entitlement story. You see, what is the biggest, who will be the biggest loser if true devolution happens? All the joint secretaries in Government of India. The employment of joint secretaries in Government of India is the single biggest employment guarantee program after the NREGA. Right? If you did not have 130 centrally sponsored schemes giving tiny bits of money, the top 10 centrally sponsored schemes accounts for 95% of all the allocation. You shut down all the other centrally sponsored schemes, the only people who will be unemployed will be joint secretaries. Right? You're inventing work for yourself. Decentralization will take away your jobs. You didn't want your jobs to go. So you created this whole thing to give the Ministry of Panchayati Raj, a tiny little animal, some power. अब तुम्हारा बजट है, मेरा भी बजट है. मेरा बजट क्या है? 2,40,000 crore. And then you see the number of guidelines. You take my presentation, check out all those guidelines, and you please tell me that through that window of the GPDP, how the union government was trying to, a Ministry of Panchayati Raj was trying to grab power. Started imposing all kinds of conditionalities. Unless you put data in my software, I will not give you the money. Arey? Your software is full of glitches. Your software doesn't work. You know, the states that have done the best software solutions are the states which said we don't want an, what's it called, NIC software. So it's completely wrong on your part to have done it. You should have, what you should have done was, you should have gone to the other ministries dealing with the core sectors and say, you comply with this. You dovetail your money with this money. Instead of that, you gave GPDP guidelines and go to any state. You think a Gram Panchayat is actually preparing a GPDP plan? No. No Gram Panchayat is preparing a GPDP plan. The entire GPDP plan is dictated by officers. Come and talk to Panchayat members and you will realize what a monster that has been created. And this is my only fight with the individual who did it, who happens to be a great friend of mine. I respect him as a mentor. We've had some battles on this.
Sir, I just one question. I'll come back to your question.
Yeah, you do mention, sir, actually that change over that the allotment is going on from 13th to 14th commission, from 80,000 to almost 2 lakh plus 2 lakhs plus something. So in also now we are focusing more on some core sectors something, and we are also tying the fund also, tied fund something. In spite of that, why we are stick on to the still the 29 subjects where we are parallelly asked to teach from NIRD that distribute all your work to 29 subjects something. When you are one side you are forcing them to go on focus on core sectors, another side we want the distribution in all the 29 subjects. It is really practically it is not happening, and it is not looking correct also to teach that way actually. Okay, so why we have to still stick on to the 29 subjects? Why can't we change that schedule itself? Whatever we envisaged in the 11th schedule. Is it not the time to come out of the glitches of the 29 subject and bring them to 7 to 8 core subject and focus on only on those subjects?
You don't have to amend the 11th schedule to do that. You don't have to amend the 11th schedule. 11th schedule is only an illustrative list. If you see the words of Article 243G, which is related to the 11th schedule, it says that you may devolve, may devolve subjects, including those listed in the 11th schedule. So if you want, you can give even more than what is listed in the 11th schedule, or you can give less. It's a simplification, and it is wrong to assume. In fact, there have been people who have tried to go to the Supreme Court and say that all the subjects in the 11th schedule shall be devolved. I have opposed. I have said don't. That will constrain federalism. It depends on the state. See, I'll tell you very simple. You look at all the 5 southern states. In another 5 to 6 years, you're going to be 50% urban. Okay, rural is rapidly. Kerala is actually today, if you compare the census definition of urban with the physical definition of what is urban, Kerala is, according to the census, the fastest urbanizing state in the country. Right? So the panchayats are using a rural instrument to deliver urban services. So I would leave it to the state to decide. So the very good question. The point is this: if I were a politician, I would more or less do what you were saying. I would meaningfully devolve 10 subjects rather than rhetorically devolving all 29 and achieving nothing.
Yeah, I thought one way I ask this question is in one way we are confusing the people.
Yeah, I don't think you should confuse them, but at the same time you cannot say the opposite.
Yeah.
You cannot say, oh, I will only restrict it to 10. See, the problem with saying something like GPDP, I said it's a very bad thing done by a very good person. So the good person expected that it will be done in a way that a planning framework will be beneficial for everybody to plan with. The monstrosity was actually, it turned into a monster because the people down the line don't want to decentralize. So they use the guideline to grab back everything. And then it became a runaway horse. Yeah, you were talking about administrative. Well, that's a matter of detail. I mean, the point is that once you created the monster, then you will see I'll put biodiversity into it. I will do village poverty reduction. But let me come to poverty, because I haven't spoken about rural development at all. And this poverty reduction approach. You see, when you look at poverty reduction, there are basically 3 kinds of deprivations that a person suffers. That is poverty. One is the income deprivation, one is the services deprivation, and the third is the exposure to risk, the inability to have a risk cover. These are the 3. Everything can be classified into that. In my opinion, the panchayat comes in only for the central part, which is the service delivery deprivation. My thesis is that if you can deliver services properly, cheaply, if there is a good PHC, good hospital, good education system there, then the service level deprivation is diminished. I have written a paper, co-authored a paper along with Dr. Govindrao on whether a panchayat can become an institution of economic development. And it requires a different approach. I mean, first of all, it requires huge local tax capacities. There have been instances, but this is not something that is prevalent in India as a culture. In the US, you have all this, because local governments have rose as economic incentive organizations. So they would compete with each other for tax capacities, they would compete with each other for manpower, there was immigrating manpower. So, I would reduce my tax levels to allow a factory to be set up in my area so that I can generate jobs and therefore create value for my people from an economic perspective. That kind of tax competition system, that mahal is not there in India. It might happen in a few states. Like in Kerala, you have that celebrated example with the government there is very upset with, which I am very happy with, where a private company decided to literally buy the panchayat. Remember, and that guy was harassed and sent away, and I think he's coming to Andhra Pradesh to set up his factory. But in my opinion, yeah, so what? How can the government dictate whom I should vote? If that panchayat is voting people from that factory, and they are creating jobs and they are paying taxes and they are getting all kinds of services which are better quality. Who are you to tell me something? The government is completely wrong in converting, but that's an exception. Out of 2,40,000 panchayats, I doubt you will find 10, 20 panchayats like that. So I would say that putting a plan like this will only mean that the government intervention for poverty reduction will be dovetailed and put. My fear is it will ultimately become just a stapled document. Somebody will produce a document, they say there's a deadline tomorrow, and then they will staple it and then put it under the panchayat president's nose, and he or she will sign. Yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Sahu. Yeah. Yes.
Two small questions. One, how do you position your narrative in this new LSDG? One, localization of SDG. Localization of SDG. How do you position this story narrative that you presented? And the second question is, do you see the possibility of something like Panchayat bond? Few years back we talked about muni bond for municipalities. Do you see the possibility something like Panchayat bond in your future?
I think, I think Jack Walden's point about managing externalities is going to become very important in the implementation of SDGs. Because now sustainability is interconnected on a global scale. So I have my doubts on whether certain things can be left to the panchayat alone to do. Certain things, on the other hand, can be done at a panchayat level, and in fact, it is best done at a panchayat level. If you look at most climate change mitigation documents, I was just reading a few of them the other day, and they were talking about what if we do nothing, and what if we do everything. How is the scenario going to be, let's say, in 2050? So the scenario is horrifying if we don't do anything. But if you do something, what is it going to be? So if you are going to do something, then there are 4 or 5 things basically. I am not leaving the massive industrial changes that are required, like in the steel industry, the transportation industry, or let us say ozone, all those gases, the refrigerant gases and all that, because those are all centralized policy initiatives which don't touch the panchayat. But the basic thing that a panchayat needs to do for sustainability at the local level in terms of environment is the massive greening that is required. And the massive greening that is required, everybody says, by the way, is not going to be a complete solution. It will buy time for us. It will slow down the process of global warming so that we can implement all the other big ticket things which are despoiling the environment. So as far as the greening aspect is concerned, as far as the biodiversity aspect is concerned, definitely it has to be a hugely panchayat driven exercise. But there also, there are externalities that will need to be managed. For example, if you are managing man-animal conflict, if you are managing pandemics, which is again reflects, it's actually a man-animal conflict in a sense, right? You cannot, animals don't respect panchayat boundaries. So you will have to have more, shall I say, geographic zone-wise treatment of some of these countries. So it will have to be a little bit of centralization, but the actual implementation, nurturing of trees, looking at greening, all that at the ground level will have to be implemented at the panchayat level. And globally, by the way, that's very interesting thing that is happening. If you look at places like Europe and all that, where now there is suddenly a sudden fear that things are going to go bad, most of the initiatives for implementing sustainable goals at the ground level are actually emerging from the state, and the panchayats are getting a little less decentralized in that sense because of the externality of the process of management. Yeah, I think there's one more question. No? Panchayat bond. Yeah, I think that's a very good idea, but it will have to be done by an aggregator. In Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, which were the first states to do municipal bonds, I think Gujarat Ahmedabad municipality did it. They did it separately because they were a good municipality and they had quite a lot of fiscal standing by itself. But in Tamil Nadu, what was done is basically tier 2 and tier 3 cities. I think it is basically tier 3 cities. They have a Tamil Nadu Urban Finance Corporation. That was the the first one of its kind, then other states repeated it. We need to have something like a Panchayat Finance Corporation. But the worry which I have seen is that these corporations then tend to override the decisions of the local government. Right? Whereas a corporation is basically an aggregator of loan, an aggregator of the, shall I say, of the bankability of the bond. Right? That is a purpose for which they are. But many of them are creeping into, because everybody loves to creep. We are a creepy place. So everybody wants to creep into this. So I found that in some states, the Urban Finance Corporation is now directly implementing projects in the municipalities. And the municipalities are complaining because their revenues and other things are escrowed to the investment made by the Finance Corporation. And if the Finance Corporation is not honest, they will pad up projects and implement projects which are actually not useful for the people or taken up at considerable cost. And the municipalities have to pay the burden for 20 years. But the Tamil Nadu model was very good. In fact, that is the reason why small towns like Tirupur and other places, all of them had UDGs 20-25 years back. And in fact, if you want to know more, you must talk to Mr. Rajivan, who is now retired. Like me, he quit the IAS. He became an expert in this subject. He's a master, absolute master in explaining to you how to set up an organization like this and how to actually run it well, honestly.
Sir, you are little bit critical about the Gram Swaraj portal and software that NIC is developing and panchayats are uploading their plans. But here my curiosity is, without a central software, how can we track the public expenditure on core sectors, drinking water, health, sanitation, so on and so forth? Number one. Number two, what happens, actually if we give so much of decentralization to the panchayat, then they will stand out to distribute the freebies, not they will invest on the core sectors.
What's a freebie?
Sir, what happened, they will, because indiscriminately they will distribute pensions, indiscriminately they will arrange the marriage of the people who don't deserve it also. So actually what happened, the benefits will percolate down to the people who really don't mean for it.
State governments don't do that? Yes. So do you then say that the state government should not be given any finance commission grants? Or that the state government should all comply with a single software? In what way will that stop?
Therefore, to curb the freebie expenditure, perhaps Honorable Prime Minister recently Dipankar Ghosh has published an article today in Times of India also. In order to curb that, perhaps there will be some judicial intervention or something like that.
The judicial intervention happened in 2013. The Supreme Court has already said that it will not interfere in the celebrated case where a public interest litigation was filed in Tamil Nadu about free television sets. The Supreme Court already has said that it is not the job of the Supreme Court to arbiter this. Have you seen the reply given to by Mr. Palnivel Tyagarajan on the Times Now network?
No.
Please watch it. Please watch it. The Supreme Court has no business whatsoever in deciding how public expenditure would happen. Number one. Number two, I will not allow any elitist person to determine what a freebie is. To me, a freebie is creating a statue to satisfy somebody's ego. That is a freebie, right? To send people on Tirthayatra is a freebie. Those are freebies, right? But they've been voted for. They have been voted for. I will respect the fact that they have been voted for because I will not have voted for it, but somebody else has voted for it and they are in a majority, right? This country has one of the worst Gini indexes in the world in terms of inequality, right? A certain individual whose net worth is more than the budgets of several states has been given Z category security 2 days back with my taxpayers' money. It's not a freebie. So I, first of all, don't think that I will not get into this freebie argument. Suffice to say that I do not buy that argument at all. Number two, you need not have a vertical integrated software to ensure that all data gets collected. You can have an interoperable software. All that the government of India needs to do is to set up the metadata standards and allow states to develop their software. So if I prepare a software which has got an intelligent interface with your software and my data comes into your software, that should suffice. Number two, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I despaired when I went into NIC to collect the data on the Panchayat portal when I was preparing the consultancy report for the 15th Finance Commission. Despaired. For all their tall claims, it was just not available. So you show me something that is working. It's still not working. And now you know what has happened. All the states have done their own thing. Karnataka has got a consultant. They are creating Panchatantra version 2. And every day, I mean, like a thirsty man in a desert, I will see Panchatantra shimmering in the sunlight. When I go there, there's nothing, only further sand. Then I can see Panchatantra somewhere far. By the time I crawl to it, Panchatantra has disappeared. There is some more sand. Show me the data, please. Please. It's not happening.
Yeah.
Implementation, we consider panchayat as the the last mile connect. Whereas I mean mostly whenever we think them, then we think about assigning some task, and they are, as you rightly mentioned, that they are not the agent to do that. In fact, I mean every program should have that. But then the program implementation people also have a question: then why I should go and report to him what I am doing? So how we should position them? As a contributor to the program, or as a only reporting official? So that was
very difficult to say unless you know the context of the program. Very difficult to say, which is the whole debate about core sector or non-core sector. In my one argument could be that the core sector definition by the Finance Commission, 14th Finance Commission, was itself arbitrary. But the fact is that somebody applied their mind and said these are the 5 or 6 things that to commonsensically I feel that should be done by a panchayat. So my simple point is this: that decision, the question that you are asking, is a decision that should be thought through. And if after thinking through, you arrive at a position where you find XYZ role for the panchayat, please calculate the administrative cost for performing that role and pay them an agency fee. That's it. Nothing else. Don't give somebody an unfunded mandate. What is happening today, and this is sadly the case with departments that have no staff. Say the animal husbandry department does not have the staff to undertake cattle census. So they will go and issue a circular saying panchayat will do the cattle census. Now the panchayat president wants to conduct a gram sabha. He looks around for the secretary is gone to do cattle census. Or the secretaries use the cattle census to push off, to just say I am attending a meeting and pushes off. So the panchayat president says, I am losing the services of my person, I've got to do something and I don't have this person. So let's have an agency contract by which you pay me 5% of that, and then we may hire 10 students to do the cattle census. I'll give you an account also, you can have it audited, and you have a system. So that is all. But what exactly should a panchayat do for a non-devolved sector has to be defined by some kind of criteria and paid for.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Sir, very small question from my side. Sir, how can we help panchayats to grow as self-correcting institution, local self-government, or self-policing system?
Create the system, create a hard budget constraint. You know, the biggest problem with panchayats is that, I mean, while I defend the panchayats, I'm also extremely worried by the fact that all the money that you're going to pump into the panchayats is only going to lead to quite a lot of corruption, right? So, how do you do it? For example, electricity bills, right? On the one hand, yes, what my wife says, what I say is correct, that you cannot charge a panchayat for unmetered connections, right? But on the other hand, what my wife was saying was very correct. She says, your guys just go and switch on the light and the light burns for 24 hours. So my answer to her was, you disconnect them if they don't pay the bill. In fact, we disconnected 18 panchayats in Karnataka those days for not paying their electricity bills, and my minister was very worried because my state government minister, he said, no, we'll get fired in the legislature. Nothing happened. They quietly came and paid their bills. So they have their capacity. So I think one of the things that we are missing in India is that by transferring more and more money to the panchayats, we are creating the wrong incentives, because everybody actually likes to be an unaccountable agent. So you impose a hard budget constraint on them by saying that these are your tasks, this is your staff. So I think you go back to that slide, that incentive structure, and if you deconstruct each one of these and apply it to, let's say, one service, let's say drinking water, sanitation, or street lights, and if you can work it, you will find a self-policing system coming up quite well.
At hand, I would request DDG sir, Shashi Bhushan sir, to present a memento to our chief guest as a token of appreciation. As the program draws to a close now, I request sir to please deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Suchita. Our honorable guest, Sir T.R. Raghunandan sir. So, sir, your knowledge is immense, and it seems that continuously you are touching in decentralization process, and you have worked as joint secretary, and earlier also you have worked in rural development. So we have many things to learn. And sir, if you get time, then we will like to, if you are willing. So CGGPA is one center which talks about panchayat governance, and as you said about hard budget constraint. So first we must try to develop as a model. Say for JJM, there is operation and maintenance issue for drinking pipe water. There we can think about this agency cost fixation and hard budget constraint, and if it is successful in some of the panchayats, we can recommend, and it can set a example also to the country. So yeah, we will like to have your time if you are willing, sir. So CGPA and CRI center is there. They will be in contact with you to how to go about it, because this what you have presented has become, we have understood it a little bit, but we need to practice it also, sir. So and from the our esteemed faculties, all they might have gained from the lecture, and let us not restrict it to the lecture part only. How to strengthen our panchayats, and as sir said, one effort our minister was mentioning when he came last time, that now the question of sustainability of NIRDPR is also like being raised by ministry as well as PMO. So minister said that first you try to make the panchayat sustainable. So what through capacity building, first you try to teach the panchayat to become sustainable. Then only you can think about your institution to be sustainable. So when your institution itself is not sustainable, how will you make the panchayat? So these are the things we are grappling with, sir. We will look forward for your further contribution to NIRDPR. So CGGPA and CRI will be in touch with you, sir. So in the end, CPR, I want to thank CPR for calling sir, and I some 4 or 5 months back I took your name that because I was seeing sir's YouTube the last time when you addressed here, the video is on YouTube. So once I was free, so I was trying to see your video, so I was going what you addressed last time. So it was very meaningful, and one should be critical, and as training institution we can afford to be critical. and because the secretariat work doesn't allow you to be, but here we can, and we can flag in terms of policy recommendation to the ministry. So ministry will take time, but slowly they will appreciate also, sir. So we will work in future what sir has guided. So in the end, sir, I thank you for this very interesting lecture, and we will keep on working. So faculty and the students who are present here, so we were really fortunate that sir has addressed and given an insight how to go about in Panchayat governance in future and how to make things more meaningful. Thank you, sir.